The other day, I said that the reason why Michael Knowles, guys like Michael Knowles and Matt Walsh, and also, frankly, Ben Shapiro, even though it's anti-trans people stance, had to do with also, and Michael Knowles was quite explicit about this, he didn't like it when conservatives allowed feminism to exist. He didn't like it with gay marriage existing. He didn't like it with... He didn't say this explicitly, but I have no doubt he doesn't like all the religious precepts that have been rolled back, like anti-miscegenation laws and slavery, which was justified by religion, and on and on. And my contention was he was a theocrat. Matt Walsh has been called a theocrat on this program. He's denied it, even though his politics are almost identical to Michael
he
Knowles.
also has theocratic fascist, ironically, in his Twitter bio.
Yes. They don't want you to understand them as theocrats, because when you do understand them as theocrats, you realize that everything that is said about the mullahs in Iran, everything that is said about the fundamentalists in Israel, who are driving half the population of Israeli Jews out of the country even, they don't want you to understand that they're theocrats because they want to pretend that they're actually like paying some homage to the idea of a constitution. And they are so desperate to make you not understand that they are theocrats, even though they're telling you in the same breath that they will twist some of the most basic like principles and sort of historical facts. Here's Michael Knowles explaining that the divine right of kings, which was a concept developed in the 1500s, I think it was, or the 1600s, somewhere around there, around the Reformation, when the English were like, we're not going to listen to the Pope anymore. So where are we going to get our authority to rule? Well, we're direct line from God. I am the king. Why am I the king? Because God put me here.
Yep.
And here is Michael Knowles trying to sort of like fiddle with this. That actually, the fact that someone could be a dictator, essentially, and doom people to death or not death or whatever it is, up or down, that's not the whole point of a divine right. It's actually the fact that God appointed them dictator is what actually inhibits their being a bad dictator.
It's actually checks and balances.
Exactly.
The libs fear that if politicians believe in God, that's going to cause them to do all manner of terrible things. If you think that the...
Pause it. Incidentally, I will tell you that there has never been a lib in this country who has voted for a winning presidential candidate that didn't believe in God. So they're like a big fear that you're going to believe in God. That's ridiculous. The question is whether they get their authority from God, whether they are governing us because they say God has told me what needs to happen and that's what I'm doing.
And you just have to listen to it because of that.
Because of that. But so go back. So understand like where he's playing with things because he doesn't want you to know he is a theocrat.
The libs fear that if politicians believe in God, that's going to cause them to do all manner of terrible things. If you think that the God-fearing politicians are bad, just wait until you see the politicians who don't fear God. This is a way, it's kind of obscured in the history now, but we all make fun of divine right monarchy as this sort of absurd idea, and we view divine right monarchs as being absolute tyrants wielding, but that isn't true. The idea of divine right monarchy is actually that there is a limit on the power of the monarch because the monarch is answerable to God. who is a lot more important and powerful than a politician who is answerable only to the people or answerable only to a small group, say in an oligarchy. This is the meaning of John Adams's famous statement, the Constitution is built for a moral and religious people. That's the constraint. When you take that constraint away in the name of the separation of church and state or the enlightened views of secularism, and when you take that away, you're going to lose the grace, you're going to lose the restraints, you're going to lose the kiss it up for vengeance is the Lord's, and you're going to get a lot of wrath and gluttony and pride and lust and all the rest of it. You're going to get a country burned.
All right.
I mean, Charles I might have something to say about lust and wrath and stuff like that.
And in
Turned out
fact,
well for him.
Charles I, let's be clear, Charles I was one of the OG Divine Right guys.
Yeah. New Church of England. Like, I'm in charge of all this stuff now.
I mean, it was almost developed for him. I think it was, was it developed?
James,
specific?
I think.
It was James.
Yeah.
He was like the second or third, I think, who got there because of the Divine Right.
Because of Henry VIII, ultimately.
They cut him. As far as I remember, they cut his head off because he was so.
Was it God that cut his head off, or was it people?
You know, that's the interesting thing. We are to believe that the constraint upon, and what did he call it? Absolute tyrant?
Absolute tyranny.
Yeah, that's another thing that's sort of ironic.
That word comes from that.
The guy who came up, the Catholic guy, right? There was a Catholic guy, Jacques Bousset. I'm probably butchering his name. Jacques Bousset came up with the idea of the divine right of kings because he was trying to sort of like, he was working for the king, incidentally. And he was Catholic, and he was trying to sort of like maintain some peace between the papacy and the Protestants. And the other great innovation he came up with, besides the divine right of kings, right? Like, God says it's okay for this guy to be king here. And that's why people have to listen, incidentally.
He's, for instance, draining your marshland, and that's really upsetting you. Well, God said he should do it.
God said he should do it. And even though the Pope might disagree, God has a direct line to these guys too. The other thing he came up with was this concept of political absolutism, which is basically a tyrant, dictator. That's the best way to run a government. One central power, period. Not these like councils of clans and stuff like that. And he wants you to believe that God is the ultimate arbiter of what a politician can or cannot do. Not democracy, not laws. Because he's basically saying democracy and laws are irrelevant. Mm-hmm. The only thing that constrains a politician is God. And so, therefore, and as a bonus, because God is the constraint on these politicians, we also threw in that part about everything the politician does that God has told him to do is right. They do not want civil laws. They do not want citizens. They do not want democracy. They don't want culture that is derived by people saying like, any form of equality or legitimacy that exists, even if they're different from the people who have maintained power for decades or centuries or millennium. They don't want that. They want God's word to dictate, period, end of story. So he's literally rewriting what the divine right of kings are about. The main emphasis is just they were constrained by God. As opposed to whom? As opposed to whom? Like, you got to believe in God to be constrained by God? That seems like a sort of a weak balance, checks and balances.
Yeah.
What's going to keep someone from saying, I believe in God, I'm God-fearing, fearing? What's going to keep them from lying? Well, if God's going to strike them down, why can't God strike down the people who are not God-fearing? Why won't those people be just as constrained by the God-fearing people? Either God is a punishing God or he's not. And I do mean he in Knowles's construction. They're theocrats. They're pushing a political ideology. Well, they are. It's theocracy. They're not even like, I saw this Reason magazine piece actually that even at CPAC, nobody's even talking about libertarian economics anymore. The conservative movement is a religious fundamentalist movement. And on some areas, they will extend it to sort of just purely cultural thing, like guns, although they probably justify it on the religious grounds in some measure anyways, right? Because we have to fight off the evil that's coming and the Satanists. But everything else, understand, the conservative movement is religious fundamentalism. The distinction has been all but removed. They just understand they have to put it in different clothing when they roll it out in front of people who don't subscribe to the idea of a theocracy. I mean, that's it.
And then to act like he's the one furthering the tradition by citing John Adams or something like that. Meanwhile, like the entire history of like, especially those hundreds of years were those people realizing like, yeah, we can't deal with monarchies. That this is something we need to put behind us historically.
What was the treaty? There was a treaty about that had to do with piracy. Maybe it was it the Moorish agreements? John Adams, I think, specifically wrote in there, we are not a Christian country.
The Barbary pirates.
Yeah.
Or is it the Treaty of Tripoli?
That's what it was. The Treaty of Tripoli.
Was that Adams or Jefferson?
Looks like Adams here, at least.
Yeah.
Per Wikipedia.
Yeah. See if you can pull up the Treaty of Tripoli. Specifically says, John Adams says,
1797 Treaty of Tripoli declares that the government of the United States
quote,
of America...
the government of the United States of America is not, in any sense, founded on the Christian religion. I don't know. You could interpret that in different ways.
And even the quote cited by Knowles is talking about the populace, which is like more frankly paternalistic, like as opposed to a sort of requirement for the leadership.
Article 11, the Treaty of Tripoli, signed by John Adams, correct? Yes. Yeah. Again, the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. Religious people might be nice. Some of them are. Religion may help some people be nice and benevolent.
Signed that in 1797.
But religious people can also not be nice. Bishop Desmond Tutu came into studio back in the early days of, was he in studio? Maybe he was. I can't remember. But we interviewed him, Janine and I. And he said, religion is like a knife. You can use it to spread butter. You can use it to stab somebody. But there are theocracies you can go to. But this is not one of them, despite Michael Knowles' desire.